Hey, welcome investors to the 40 Finance channel. My name's Jeff Beers. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Square stock. One of the most popular questions I get, of course, being a PayPal investor, is what do you think of Square and why do you like PayPal so much, but you never talk about Square? And the reason is, frankly, I'm a bit of a Square bear, if you will. I have a lot of concerns with the company going forward that I'll outline here. And it's not to say that I think Square's stock is going to tank or they're going to go bankrupt. No, they are going to grow. And I definitely see the stock price increasing over time. So I don't necessarily think that it's a bad investment. But over the next year or two, I think PayPal is going to outperform Square based on some of the concerns that I'll outline here. And therefore, for me personally, I think PayPal is a better investment. Reminder before we jump in that my stock picks and projections, they're just my opinion for your entertainment. Please talk to a financial professional before taking on the risks of the stock market. However, if you do enjoy stock market analysis and going deep on stocks like Square and PayPal, I post 3 or 4 videos every single week here on the 40 Finance channel. So make sure you subscribe to keep up with all the latest content. And as a free bonus, if you're interested in joining my email list, I have my free 15-minute stock analysis guide for you. Link in the description to sign up for that. The 15-minute stock analysis guide gives you a lot of great free resources to go out and scout some of those stocks that you may not be familiar with, but you hear people talking about them and you want to add them to your watch list. All right, so again, in this video, I'm not saying that Square is the worst stock of all time and that they're going to go bankrupt. So I just want to be clear on that. What we're talking about here is concerns that I have over the next year or two about Square and why I personally have chosen PayPal, which is, in my opinion, a much better investment over the next 1 to 2 years. So the grade card will be pretty simple, and we'll see it as we go along. When we look back at this video in a couple years, we're going to see, hey, was I right? Did PayPal outperform Square? Did other fintech companies outperform Square? Or did Square just flat out prove me wrong? And that will be measured in ROI and stock investment returns. All right, so here's my 4 sort of bullet points on the bear case. We'll go through each one in detail. I believe fintech supremacy is one at much higher tiers than Square currently plays on. So think e-com, enterprise, data type integrations, places that Square doesn't currently do much. And frankly, you see at the end there, the small business market is soft for obvious reasons. And it's not particularly a place that I see a ton of growth over the next year or two. Not just because of the pandemic, but trying to crawl out of the pandemic. Bullet point 2 there, Square's luck, as I'm calling it, their luck with stimulus, crypto trading, and the Cash App will subside over time. And I'll go through that bullet point here in a little bit. Number 3, the current valuation has more downside than upside in the current economic climate. So we'll look at where Square stock is trading today and talk about what potential upside is remaining over this next year or two. And finally, the most important thing, which I try to reiterate, Square is going to grow. Okay, they're at a place where they are definitely going to grow. And I do believe that the stock price will be worth more in 2 years than it is today. What I'm talking about here is PayPal will outperform over the next 12 to 24 months, frankly, at a minimum at this point. Yes, Square should make investors some money. I think PayPal has the opportunity to make more. All right, let's kick things off and take a quick look at where Square stock sits as of today. You got a stock price of $154.21. I highlighted a couple boxes there. PE ratio currently at 238.59. And the EPS comes in at 0.64. 52-week range. These are always weird with pandemic, but you're down in the 32s at the very lowest of lows. and the high is 170. So currently trading off of the 52-week high. And outside of that 32 that came at the pandemic lows, Square was in the neighborhood of $66 to $70. You can see in the chart on the right. At the top of the screen, we got a couple additional figures. Trailing 12 months revenue of $5.8 billion. Square is definitely not a small cap stock. You got a forward PE of 133. So good to see that the PE is dropping or expected to looking ahead. Cash on hand at $2.69 billion, long-term debt of $2.66 billion. So I definitely think Square is in a good shape to pay off their debts. Again, we are not talking about bankruptcy or the stock going to zero here. All right, let's take a quick look at where analysts are projecting Square as of today. Using the TipRanks dashboard, looking off to the far right, not highlighted, is the date box that I always call attention to. Everybody on this board is no more than a month out, so this is good. These are fresh ratings, and I think I highlighted the highest and lowest. Just 7 days ago, you had someone come out with a price target of 225, which is a 48% upside from today. Obviously, I would vehemently disagree with that person. And then on the low side, I would probably disagree with this person too. They would have sell at 114, minus 25% downside from today. Outside of those extremes, if I had to just make an eyeball average here, I would say most of these analysts are right in that, plus 10% over the next 12 months. All right, so I laid out my 4 bear bullet points, if you will. Let's dig into each one and I'll share my perspective of why I feel the way I do. All right, that first bullet point, Fintech supremacy is won at higher tiers than Square currently plays on. And what this really just gets down to is if you take a company like PayPal, they're just playing with the big dogs, okay? They're not trying to help ice cream shops with their cashier platforms or independent restaurant chains. They're up where money is being spent. They're up in a volume game, which has the prognosis of producing even more volume in the future. You see some of these images that came from the investor report. PayPal's working hard on multimodal payment systems. It's crazy how QR codes are coming back into play. Tap and pay, mobile pay. Basically, PayPal is turning into almost like an alternative bank, right? Because you can pay people, you can receive money, you can use your money in so many different places when you throw in Venmo on top of it. So very aggressive game plan by PayPal to reach new markets. They also are engaging users, if you look in the middle, trying to come up with ways with the Honey acquisition and, of course, Venmo, trying to make, let's just say, trying to make spending fun and trying to make the PayPal user network fun as well. And then off to the right, the in-app experiences. The biggest partnership for PayPal this year has probably been CVS. Where they've integrated some different options there. And at the bottom is just like a quick collection of some of the big retailers that they're working with. I circled eBay because I know that's going to be a common question. They branched off from eBay to become a standalone business. There's a lot of bad rumors on the internet that are like, PayPal lost their whole eBay business, right? That is not true. Okay, eBay does have a new checkout system. I'm not sure if it's live yet because I don't go to the site very often. PayPal is still a payment option on eBay. Please don't confuse that. Don't fall into the headlines. Not that it isn't going to be a net loss for PayPal over time, but it's not a zero-sum game where they just disappeared from the website. All right, so the second half of my first point has to do with small business market. Obviously, as I alluded to earlier, you have the area that PayPal is playing at, gigantic companies. Then we get into Square's world, which is focused more on more vendors, less transactions, right? But more small vendors. So it's sort of an ass backwards way of doing things compared to PayPal. And there's certainly money to be made in the small business market, as Square has already shown. The concern that I have, particularly over the next year or two, is just where small businesses are at in this world. And when I say world, I mean international as well. Square definitely has international expansion plans, which I think is super smart. But all small businesses across the world are on tough times, just going through what we're going through with the pandemic. Couple reference points on here. I think the biggest one is off to the left. This is the website was formerly Internet Retailer. It's now Digital Commerce 360. Online holiday sales set to surge 25 to 35%. I don't think that really surprises anybody, but of course that's not new money. Right? So new money pouring into e-com at the plus 35% level, if that were to occur, that money isn't just random new money in the system. It has to come from somewhere. And so if you look at the yellow lines below, they're saying total retail holiday sales will increase a modest 1 to 1.5%. So retail would be in store, right? And new business survey finds that 34% of retailers are expecting their online holiday sales to decrease this year. That's kind of interesting because you're talking about online holiday sales in the small business space, kind of alluding to the fact that more people would be purchasing from the big dogs, so to speak. But we know one thing, that if we can't get relief in the form of any sort of protection from the pandemic, then in-store shopping is going to tank pretty hard this year. All right, off to the right is sort of a look at Square's competition. They are still number one, and I think that they, from a branding perspective, I think that they still, have the most recognition. But it's not like they're the only ones doing it. Okay, so you got Clover, QuickBooks, Lightspeed, Toast. I am not familiar with the bottom two. I can tell you that Clover I'm very familiar with and have seen a number of retailers using that one. Doesn't mean it's better than Square. Maybe it is. I have no idea. But the bottom line is small businesses have choices. That choice is not just Square. And you better believe that in tight economic times, they are going to be comparing their options very closely. All right, point number two, when I say Square's had, good luck with the stimulus and with crypto trading, I want to go in detail about that, and I'm going to get into Cash App here in a second. But let's talk about what I mean by luck. All right, this article from Barron's, I think, gives the best overview here, and we'll start from the top in the yellow box. Square's revenue from Bitcoin was $875 million, up 600% year over year. It accounted for an enormous portion of the company's $1.92 billion in revenue. And then you see the next line, but that revenue is somewhat deceiving. And I called out Square's Bitcoin a month or two ago, and I flagged that as disappointing for investors. But the news is actually even worse than I thought. But what's disappointing is that they have to report $1.92 billion in revenue from Bitcoin, but they actually didn't even make that. So apparently Square buys Bitcoin and takes a small margin on each sale to customers, which it records as gross profit. The company recorded $17 million gross profit from Bitcoin trading in the quarter, less than 3% of its total gross profit. So while this was $1.92 billion in revenue, the small margin on each sale, which it records as gross profit, actually was only $17 million. So when you saw that line item in the revenue, and it's like, holy mackerel, $2 billion or whatever it was, they're literally getting a fraction of that. And that can be difficult to work through if you're just looking at the spreadsheets. Now, on to the stimulus and the blue box. Square benefited from people depositing their stimulus checks into their Cash App accounts. Many of those people with the Cash App also appear to have traded stocks along with Bitcoin. Square started allowing equity investments through its Cash App investing subsidiary last October. All right, so nothing wrong with adding a investing option in Cash App. Makes a lot of sense. Kudos to Square for coming up with a way to kind of connect things that people can do with their money from a revenue perspective. The hard part, at least from my eyes, is that stimulus checks aren't just dropping out of the sky every 5 minutes. So if you're talking about the world struggling maybe for another 6 to 12 months, depending on, vaccine and what happens, stimulus checks just aren't going to fly out of the sky and have, pump up what Square has been able to do with the money that's in there. Even worse than that, you have a comp scenario next year where you had this Q2 where free money did fall from the sky, and next year you're going to wake up on Cash App and people are going to be like, dude, what happened to all the deposits we had in Q2 of last year? What happened to all the investments that were made last year? You're looking at a negative comp perspective there, and that's concerning over the next year. All right, so continuing the luck sentiment that I have, now let's dig into Cash App. Here's the thing that nobody talks about with Cash App that I'm kind of surprised flies under the radar. If you look off to the left with Cash App, they do these Cash App Fridays where they literally give away money, which is awesome. You can see July 31st, they gave away $25,000. You retweet and you comment with your cash tag, you could win $250 or $500. Tag a friend. You must follow at Cash App. So this is a, textbook social media play funded with a monetary reward, which there's nothing illegal about that, right? But it is certainly not organic growth by any stretch of the imagination. So if you look off to my comments on the right, Square is buying, incentivizing Cash App users, which is legal, of course, but Cash App giveaways, some of which feature celebrities, have become home to the poor looking for financial aid. Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with folks who are down on their luck trying to claim free money on Twitter. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you can't find a job, right? But the hard part for Square in doing this, when you're attracting a contingent of unemployed folks who are down on their luck, that's the user base that you're building. That's the account profile that you're building. And if you guys study the Facebooks and Instagrams and all these other things, your app user-based profile says a lot about how much you can monetize that platform in the future. And quite frankly, if it's filled with people who do not have a lot of money, then you're going to have a user profile that you're going to struggle to sell them things unless you want to sell them bad credit type products. And I think that that is a major problem for Square. All right, so to look at this again, if you look at the last paragraph on this that I put together, these are not the type of folks who drive long-term user value unless you are selling bad credit products. This could end badly for Square if they later try to profit off of low-income users with high-interest products. So again, the big thing I'm worried about here is which direction Square goes with their user profile. If you're going to come back online after giving away, X amount of money to folks who absolutely need it, and you're going to pitch them high-interest payday loans or something like that, that's not going to skip over the radar, and you're going to have some call-outs by short sellers and bears like myself. Again, nothing crazy about giving away money to get followers on Twitter and build up your Cash App user base, but I am a little concerned on who they're attracting and what they think they're going to do with that user base over the long term. All right, so point number 3 in the bear case, current valuation is more downside than upside in the current economic climate, right? So keeping in mind of what we just talked about with small business and how they're struggling and they're likely very leveraged from a loan perspective. Then we just look at the raw fundamentals of the stock and you're at 224 trailing PE, forward PE of 133. You only have to go back to June 30th. That date by itself was already after the dip, and you're at 159. Then you go back to March, you were at 64. And then, Square doesn't have a long list of profitability, so it sort of ends there. Bottom line is, the quarter that ended on 3/31 to the quarter that ended on June 30th to where we sit today, the PE ratio has 4x'd in that time. Now, forward PE is arguably more important than post PE. but it does rely on your EPS projections, okay? So if those EPS projections are screwed, and we'll take a look at that in a second, then you can throw forward PE out the window. So the forward PE today is looking good in the sense that it's dropping, but we have to assume that Square will sort of programmatically reach their EPS targets. Just to use a couple other samples, price to sales, you can see, relatively up certainly from last year, and price to book, which is always tough with the tech company, but just to throw another one out there, you see again, you're at all-time highs, at least from the standpoint of this chart. All right, so I talked a little bit about forward PE. Forward PE is a great metric, and I think all investors look at it like, hey, the PE I get today is X, but what does it really mean if I hold the stock for 5 years or 2 years? What can we take back from the forward PE? And it works when the EPS targets are hit. So projecting EPS is not an easy game, and you guys have seen me do a few videos where I've tried to project, Apple's stock price and stuff like that. It's a guessing game. It's a dartboard. So if Square doesn't hit their EPS projections, then that forward PE, of course, would go up higher than it is today. Now, on the flip side, if they blow their projections out of the water, then that forward PE actually comes down and you might have yourself a deal. Let's take a look at Square's EPS projections over the next year or two. All right, so in a perfect world, obviously you want EPS to increase both on a quarterly and annual basis. We will start off to the left in the orange box. The average estimate for the current quarter is 16 cents. You got some highs, you got some lows, but it landed at 16 cents. Last year's EPS for the same quarter was 25 cents. So we're going in the wrong direction on that one. Going to the blue box right next to it. For the fourth quarter, you have an average estimate of 23 cents. Last year at that time, 23 cents. So now you're flat. And so how does that add up for the purple box, which is the full fiscal year? No surprise that that is less than last year with the small business concerns. So you're at 80 cents last year, you're at 56 cents this year. I think we all understand why Square's EPS fell like it did, but I'm just calling it out that it is going in the wrong direction, at least for this year. Now, on the bright side, on the far right, in the light blue box, those analysts who are brave enough to project next year's EPS, the average comes in at $1.21. And if they end 2020 at the 56 cents, then you have a pretty substantial jump there, right? Basically have over double up for the EPS. All right, so the question you have to ask yourself as an investor, if you're going to use forward PE to make your argument, do you believe that these, EPS estimates or estimates that you created yourself reflect the forward PE? Because if there's any kind of uncertainty, like I feel like Square is in the midst of uncertainty in the short term, I don't know if that $1.21 is going to come to fruition. I personally wouldn't bet $1 on it, but I've definitely been wrong more than once. Okay, so that covers all my chief concerns with Square. Now let's flip our perspective and look at it from the PayPal angle, right? Because everybody asks me, why do you pick PayPal over Square? Well, I'm getting there, right? I just showed you my concerns about Square. And there's one last element here that I believe encapsulates sort of the whole thing for me. All right, so this is a year-to-date stock chart. And there's two things as you're looking at this, and you can see Square is clearly winning. In fact, they're 2xing PayPal. So congratulations on that. Two things we got to think about, right? Because we're looking ahead to the future. I'm saying PayPal outperforms Square. I can just summarize for you. You can watch my PayPal videos. I go all in deep. The bottom line is PayPal is on a streak of awesome news. So let's keep it there. Then on the Square side, if you're buying into what I'm selling, I say Square's in the midst of, somewhat negative news in terms of growth, right? I think that their growth is sort of paused for a second. Certainly down from the expectations we had a year or two ago. Now, when you look at the year-to-date stock price, in particular, the compounding returns that are occurring most recently here, you have companies that I think are on different trajectories right now. Square's up 150%, PayPal's up 70%. Without digging in fundamentals, I'm going to go ahead and say at some point over the next year or two that PayPal does the crossover. It just makes sense because they are in different places right now. And I know the naysayers will say, hey, two different stock prices, two different sort of growth objectives. PayPal's gigantic. Square will win just because they're smaller and they can grow more. I get it. Okay, I understand that. But my concerns, I think, are rooted enough that I do believe PayPal will overtake Square in stock appreciation over the next year or two. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this look at my Square bear case. Again, it's just my opinion. It could go either way, and I've been wrong 100 times before. But to me, this is the fun part of investing, right? This is like formulating a theory, trying to formulate a conviction so that you feel good about buying or selling something. Obviously, I have a strong conviction on PayPal, but a lot of people ask me about Square, and when I look at Square, I just don't see the same opportunity right now. All right, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe. Don't forget about the free 15-minute stock analysis, link in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.